This is the first lesson in the HTML, CSS and JavaScript unit of work. Now what we're going to have a look at is remind ourselves what HTML and CSS is, but also understand the limitations of these two languages when making web pages. We're going to understand what JavaScript is and understand how to use JavaScript to make web pages come to life. Now there are three main languages of the web. There's HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Now HTML tells the browser how text and images should be structured on the screen. So it's known as the structural language of the web. And here's an example of some HTML in action. You can see that between our body tags we've got a heading with cheese written in it. We've got a paragraph tag with this page is all about cheese, and then we've got an image with a link to a web to an image that is on the web. And this is what the web page would look like. So all of the content is structured on the page, but it doesn't really look very smart at all. And that's where CSS code can come in. So CSS improves the presentation of a web page. It tells the browser how text and images should be presented on the screen. So if HTML is the structural layer, CSS is known as the presentation layer. So if we had some HTML code that we saw before, and we started to style the HTML tags using some CSS code, for example, changing the background color to aqua, changing the heading tags so the font size was larger, that it was yellow in font and had a slightly different font style, and similar changes to paragraph tags and images tags, then that same web page that we saw before would be transformed into what you see now. So CSS can improve the presentation of a web page. Now the limitations of both of these languages is that they both do not really allow a web page to come to life. They don't allow users really to interact with the web page. It doesn't really do any calculations or decision making. And that's where JavaScript comes in, because JavaScript is a programming language that you can apply or you can use to build web pages and websites so that the web pages can come to life, can do a little bit more than just present you with information. So we'll have a little look at how we can insert some JavaScript to a web page and have it be interacted with by the user. Okay, so here we are back in our integrated development environment where we can start playing around with a bit of HTML, CSS and JavaScript and see what would happen on the screen. Now JavaScript is inserted between script tags, and I will add the script tags in my head tags, and here I'm going to introduce a bit of JavaScript, a function which is going to create a little alert box when a button is pressed. So I'm going to write the name function, I'm going to give it a name, run, and then I'm going to open up some curly brackets, and then I'm going to write a bit of JavaScript, a command called alert, and inside my alert I'm going to write down the text. Here is an alert box, and I'm going to finish with a semicolon. Now if I was to try and update the page, you can see that nothing really happens. Now what I will do is I need to create a button which can actually run this function, because if I simply just look at the page, I can't obviously get the page to run that particular function. I need, as a user, to interact with something on that page, so therefore I'll create a little button so that when I click it, that function will run. Now to create a button in my body, I'm going to create the following HTML code. So here is a bit of HTML code which is going to create a button, and it's going to have the text submit placed on that button, and when I click it, it's going to try and find a function called run. Now up here you can see that I've got a function called run, so that now when I press the run button, you can see that I've got a little submit button here, and if I click submit, you can see that I've got an alert box which pops up saying here is an alert box. I press OK and it disappears. Now, instead of getting my function to simply show or display some text which I've hard coded into that alert box, what I might want to do instead is actually have or use some variables where I can enter some data into these variables, and then I can combine or join the variables together to display different messages on the screen. And the reason why I might want to do that, although you might think it's still hard coding text into my code, if I start introducing the idea of variables, then it might be that towards the end of this little lesson, I show you how we can create a form where users can type in different values, store them in variables, and then completely different information can be displayed in an alert box when the button is pressed. So to create a variable inside my function, I'm just going to add a new line, and I'm going to type in the text var, let's say first name, equals, and then let's say Bob. Finish with a colon. I'm going to create another variable. I'm going to say surname equals Smith. Finish with a colon, and then in the alert box, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that text, and I'm going to use the variables that now contain the word or the name Bob and Smith, and I'm going to join them together with a space in between. So now, if I was to update my page and I was to click on the submit button, you can see that now the pop-up says Bob Smith. So it takes the values from the different variables and joins them together in the alert box. Now we can go further, and we can, instead of joining together some text, we could get our alert box doing a little calculation. So instead of saying first name as the first variable, let's call this one number 1, and instead of adding a string or some characters text to the variable, I might add the number or assign the number 5 to number 1, and let's create another variable number 2, and let's assign the value of 6, and what we'll do is we'll get our alert box simply adding number 1 to number 2. So now if I update my page and click on the submit button, it says 11 in the alert box because it's added those two values together and displayed the result. Okay, so now let's have a look to see how we could perhaps have the user enter some data into a form on the web page, and then when we press the submit button, the data that they've entered appears on an alert box. So to create the form, I need to alter my HTML code. So let's get rid of this heading and this paragraph, and let's type in some information for the user. For example, in a paragraph tag, I might say something like enter your first name, and I'll close that. Might add a break, and then I'm going to enter the code which will create an input field. So that the user can start typing something in. So here I've added in the HTML code input, but this time the type is text as opposed to button. So it's a text field, and it's got given the name first name and the ID first name. Now if I run that code, you can see that we've now got a little input field. Now the button is to the right of it. If I put a break between, then obviously that breaks onto a new line. Now what I could do is, just thinking that paragraph tag already produces a break for me, so it's already on a new line, I might copy that code and I might then paste it, and this time change first name to surname, and the same here and here. So now I've got an input form where the user can enter their first name and their surname. Now if I were to do that, I haven't updated my function to collect the information that has been entered into each of these fields. So that's what I now need to do. So where it says variable number 1 equals 5, I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to create a variable called first name, And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign to that variable the following code: document.getElementById firstname.value. Now that means find where there's an element with the ID first name, which is that first input field, get the value within it, and place it inside the variable here called firstname. I can do exactly the same for surname. Surname equals, this time I'm going to just alter the ID to surname so it collects the text that's in the correct element here. And then finally what I want to do is I want to join those two variables together so that it can display the user's name that they've typed in on the alert box. So I'll go first name plus, I'll create some space between, plus surname. So let's update my page and let's see if this works. So let's type in Sally, Sparrow, and let's submit. And you can see here that the name that was entered by the user has now been placed into that alert box. Therefore, we can see that we have created our input forms to collect information from the user, and then we've got a bit of JavaScript which will collect the data into variables and then manipulate them by presenting the names that were entered into an alert box. So hopefully that's a little introduction there to JavaScript, what it can do, how it can be entered into our HTML code so that we can begin to bring our web pages to life.